Hello, everybody, and welcome into today's episode of the Top Cut Yu-Gi-Oh! Podcast. My name is Sunny. I am here with my co-host, Caleb.
Hello.
And, of course, we are here with the one, the only GGYGO. What is up, my dude?
How's it going, everyone?
Well, we have some really cool stuff to cover. We are covering it again because the bots hate us. But that's okay. We don't mind recording another bunch of content for you guys because we always do. So, we're going to give this another shot, and hopefully these recording bots can actually do their job for once.
Yeah.
I'm saying that with them in the room. They're going to hear me, and we're going to get nothing again.
Probably.
Okay. Before we get too far in,
yes.
I want to, of course, thank all of our Patreons. So, a huge thank you to Cam Yang, Austin Johnson, Salix, Kane Martin, Damian Zink, Gate Guardian Support, HZH Cyber, Marshawn Jones, Witchcrafter Main 2022, Zyphorus, Zephyrus, AD, Aaron Gardner, Anthony Lila, Brandon, Dank Nugs, Invoked Fart, Kevin Hugh, MBT's Big Ol' Bussy, Mountain Man, Owen Alvarado, Pig, Rudolph, Sneaky Links, Virtually Saviors World, What Does Pot of Greed Do, Old Man Red, Ray Powell, Rhoda to 3 Please, and Slaking It Up. Thank you all for your continued support. And I just want to put this out there. If you are a patron, please make sure that your shipping address is on your Patreon account. If it is not, then Patreon does not have a way to ship you your merch that you have earned for being a patron. So if you don't have a shipping address, especially if you're in the $5, $10, or $20 tiers, be sure to put that in. Also, if you want me to read a really dumb name, it only costs you $1 a month. Just keep it kind of not explicit. So, with that said, if you want to support the podcast, though, at no extra cost to you, be sure to check out our TCG Player affiliate link. The link is in the description down below. Also, if you want to come check out our remote duel locals, those take place every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. They are free to enter. They are mostly about helping people get better at the game. And of course, we do have an invite system to a tournament that we'll be running later this year that will have prizing, and all you have to do is earn your invite by playing in our locals. If you want more information for that, just join the Discord server, and we have moderators as well as myself and Caleb that are always willing to help out. Also, be sure to check us out on Twitter. And did I forget anything?
None I can think of.
Okay, cool. I think I got it on the first try that time.
Okay.
So, before we forget, because we forgot last time until the end of the episode, we do have a new product to talk about. We do want to talk just for a moment about the secret shiny box that was announced, that was released in the OCG last year. We have an announcement for it coming to the TCG this year. It's a pretty cool product. It'll have 70 of some kind of an oversleeve, I believe, as well as 60 or 70 of some generic either Witchcrafter or Sky Striker sleeve. And it will have a lot of OCG imports as well as maybe some TCG reprints. We aren't for certain what all will be in the box yet. It doesn't come out till November the 4th. So we have a lot of time for this to get pushed back.
Yeah.
So... But this will be the introduction of things like probably Aileron, which is a Sky Striker card, and then Sky Striker Linkage, as well as what's the level 7 Mecha Kaiju guy?
Hamp.
Yeah, that.
Yes.
And all of those cards are, of course, pure cope, but they're there.
I mean, it's still going to be a really cool product because the oversleeves and the undersleeves. And
Yeah. The accessories are what sells this product to me, but you'll also get 4 packs of 5 cards each, all in ultra rare, I do believe. But so it'll be similar to the Dual Overload product or the Dual Power product. And I mean, Dual Overload was one of the best products of all time. The imports that we got on top of the actual new cards and the reprints, blowout set. Really good set. So, be keeping your eye out for that if you're a Sky Striker player. Be ready. Linkage is the only card that's not pure cope. But I don't know. I know, Gary, you're not very pilled on linkage, but I know a lot of people are. But
I just don't believe that card's very good. I think that there's a lot of better options out there, especially if you just want to play like blind going second, or if you are going first. I feel like, again, there's just other cards that I prefer to run. There's the big hassle of that card locking you into striker extra deck monsters. And just in testing online with that card, that comes up a lot when you're trying to like OTK, even through like access code, or how like Helxaline's very popular, or even some of the Charmers. And the ability to not be able to go into those is really hard. So I feel like it's nice because it's more ways to array, but it's also like such a downside as well.
Yeah, for sure. So take that to heart if you're a Sky Striker player, that the cards potentially cope. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get on into our main topic of discussion, which is, of course, we're going to be doing some meta-analysis, and we're going to be doing a little bit of the... So we're going to do coverage of YCS Guadalajara, which was this past weekend in Guadalajara, Mexico, as well as we're going to be talking about some tech choices that you can run in your deck to give it that extra oomph against these meta decks that you might be seeing. So let's go ahead and get on into the YCS breakdown. So what we have is we have 25. We have 25 of the top 32. And we have all of what made it to top 16. So, a full breakdown of those 25 that we have are, we have 9 Despia, 5 Destiny Adventure Prank Kids, 4 Sword Soul, 2 Adventure Phantom Knight DPE, 1 Tri Brigade Branded, 1 Adventure Cybers Eldritch DPE, 1 Adventure Dragon Link DPE, 1 Adventure Salamandra DPE, 1 Adventure Synchro, and 7 Unknowns. And as far as what made it into the top 16, we have 5 Despia, 4 Prank Kid, 3 Sword Soul, 1 Tri Brigade Albaz, the Cybers Eldritch, the Adventure DPE Dragon Link, and the Adventure DPE Salamandra. So, it's an interesting breakdown. I don't know that it is entirely representative of what the meta really looks like right now, but it's interesting to see the representation that Despia has here. I don't know that I would necessarily call Despia just flat out the best deck, but it is very good, and I think that this is evidence of that, as well as it flat out won the event. So a huge congratulations goes out to Andres Torres, who won the event. He is absolutely in the pantheon of the greatest players of all time. He is absolutely insane at the game, and he now has more YCS wins than anybody ever. He has 5 YCS wins. That's more than Billy Brake. That's more than guys like Patrick Hoban. I mean, he is absolutely cracked at the game. And that is, keeping in mind, last weekend at YCS Bogota, he got top 4. And a month ago at YCS Charlotte, he got top 8 playing Despia before the structure deck came out. Dude's on a different level. He really is. So let's talk for a minute about Despia. And let's talk for a minute about what makes this deck so good. We talked about it a lot in the last episode, but it's worth discussing a little bit more in depth here. And Gary, I would really like to hear your thoughts specifically on what exactly makes this deck such an interesting threat.
So, I really like Despia for the simple fact that it just has a lot of ways to be able to play around hand traps, to dodge hand traps. By things like Branded and Red. It also just has a lot of really good utility in the deck, and being able to summon things like the Mirror Jade, go into even Dragoon against certain matchups is really still a big deal. Even though it's lesser of a deal against decks like Sword Soul and other ones in the meta currently, that just because like the meta now, it's so much more different than what it was before. Because before, if you summoned a Dragoon, it just felt like it was GG in the chat. But like now, it just like it's so much different. And I think that that's really noteworthy too, because the game, it really does show that it doesn't really need much to swing into one deck's favor. For example, like we saw Plunder Patrol not too long ago where the deck was rather just not great. And then we saw them get one card being the Raven. And now we see the Despia deck where even though it was performing before and it gets that one structure deck with realistically a couple cards from the structure deck being like the Branded Fusion and the Mirror Jade, and just seeing how much of an effect that can have in the meta. I really like that too, just because like I really have to respect that deck when I go to an event. Because even though I really think that Striker has a good matchup against it, it's still something that gives such a good grind game that you have to respect it. Which I think is really nice too, and it's definitely a change in pace in the game, because before all we really saw was like Prank Kid, and that was like be all end all, but it's crazy now that we have this, and it's automatically like one of the best, if not the best, in the game currently.
Yeah, the deck really is absolutely insane, and I think that it's interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing what some of these lists actually look like, because when you think about it more in depth, there's a couple of different ways that Despia is being built right now. You have the adventure version, and then you have a version that leans more into the Edge Imp and the Patchwork engine. Now, some people don't like the Patchwork engine, and some people don't like the Despia. I mean, the adventure engine in the Despia deck.
We got there eventually.
Yeah, we got there. Listen, it's late. It's been a long day. Second time recording this. There's a lot happening. But I don't know that I'm ready to call Despia the best deck. I know I mentioned that earlier, and I know that it does have the largest cut of top cut here, but I think it's fair to say that while yes, it does represent more of top cut than any other deck that we know of. 4 or 5 of the unknowns could be Prank Kids, but I think that it's fair to say that Despia probably has the highest representation in top cut. I think that it's also fair to say that the Despia deck probably has the highest representation when it comes to the overall field, and that this, with it's kind of new toy syndrome.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
and also the deck's fairly cheap to build.
Yeah, when you compare it with things like the Adventure Prank Kid deck, or the base decks, or the Sword Soul decks, where you have to get things like Baron, and where you have to get things like the Adventure Engine
and Destroy Phoenix Enforcer, plus the Fusion Destiny,
Magician Souls,
Illusion Chaos, it can get expensive real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I mean, just the Adventure package this time I looked was what, $300?
Yeah, it's around there. I mean, you could literally build the entire Despia deck minus hand traps, which it doesn't even run that many hand traps, for around $300.
Yeah, for the price of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
like
8, 9 cards at most.
Yeah, in the Adventure Engine, right? Yeah, I think that the Despia deck, I'm not going to say it's budget. I'm not. I acknowledge that $300 is absolutely not budget for the vast majority of the player base. But when you compare it to the decks that we've had over the last year or two, where you're looking at some of the best decks in the meta all being that really expensive, upwards of $1,000 for a meta deck, this is a nice change of pace and could be a reason that we see the representation number being the way it is. I mean, it's realistic that 20 to 25% of the initial room of 1,250 players was Despia. And I know that sounds like a crazy number and it sounds like a lot, and it might be on the high side, I acknowledge that, but it does help explain why Despia has such high representation here. I'm not saying it's not a good deck. It absolutely is a very, very good deck. But I would take the representation numbers, I'm not even gonna say with a grain of salt, but I wouldn't put all my eggs into the Despia basket and say that it's the best deck just based off these representation numbers in top cut. I mean, is that a fair assessment? Because I still think that Prank Kids, Sword Soul, things like this are just really good decks that shouldn't be discounted just because Despia is around.
Yeah, I definitely think that Prank Kid is still the best deck. I think that deck just has a lot going for it still. And there's nothing wrong with that either. There's a lot of people who will say that the other deck, the Despia deck, will end up being the best. And that, it might be true at some point. But as far as right now goes, I think that Prank still is definitely adjusting to the meta and what's going on. And that's one thing that it just shows how good of a deck it is in general, is because if you can adapt in a deck to any situation like that, then I feel like you're objectively miles ahead of everything else.
Yeah, and I also think that the Despia deck, for the most part, hasn't really been figured out yet. When you look at the Adventure Prank Kid deck, that deck has been around for a couple of months, and people have had time to really figure out the deck, figure out the lines, figure out the ins and outs of the deck, and what goes into a proper build of that deck. Whereas Despia, people are divided on what engines to run on the deck. People are divided on a lot of things. So until we see a really standardized list and a standardized way that it's accepted, this is the best version of the deck, I don't know that we'll see Despia truly be the best deck in the room, right? The deck is not solved yet. Just like this meta right now is not solved, that deck is also not solved.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that's really important, and it's really something that with the Despia deck, it's kind of wild too, because there are so many variants, and even my buddy just went top 8 at the Columbus Regional, and he was not playing the Frightfur engine, and even I think that that's just like really needed, right? But there's a lot of lists out there that just also don't agree. So I think that's really interesting just in itself, that one build or like one deck can have so many different builds.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the Despia deck in a nutshell. I think we also covered Destiny Adventure Prank Kids pretty well there, but I will still focus on it for just a moment. I still think that it is, if it's not the best deck in the room, then it's probably tied. But Prank Kids has a lot going for it. It is a tier 1 deck for sure, without a doubt. And I think that when you're deck building and making your tech choices, this is a deck that obviously you need to consider, and it's a deck that you need to be aware of. So don't take the Prank Kid deck lightly, because it doesn't have the highest representation at this particular top cut. Understand that it will still be at the top tables, it will still be a top deck, and it will still be played.
Yeah, we just talked about this too, about the fact that in both the previous YCSs, that we saw the Prank Kid versus Despia matchup in the finals both times. So it definitely is warranted to be there.
Absolutely. Next, we have Sword Soul. Sword Soul is really interesting. It's the only deck on this list where it's not really being meshed with Adventure. It's not really being meshed with the DPE engine. It's Sword Soul Tenyi. It's doing its own thing. It's just in the room vibing. And it's pretty interesting to me that you consistently see 4 to 5 of these in top cut at these YCSs. When you look at the deck, and it doesn't really feel like a deck that is doing the same things that these other decks are doing. You know, it's not linking off Reverte. It's not sending Water Enchantress with Cherubini. It's not doing these things that the other decks are just doing consistently. It's just focused on making its Synchro board, making Chi-Jiao Baron, drawing a couple cards, and having a couple hand traps in hand, and then winning the game. But I also think that Sword Soul is interesting because it has a very good matchup against Despia. So take from that what you will. But overall, I think Sword Soul is a pretty cool meta call. The thing that the deck has going against it, as much as any other deck, is that D-Barrier really hurts, and Token Collector really hurts, and these are cards that are very prevalent in the meta. So it's interesting to me is to see these decks topping, even though these counters are so prevalent in the meta, and not even necessarily for this deck, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, when you're running Sword Soul, you gotta realize that everyone's side decking Token Collector, and that card is just such a lopsided power card against Sword Soul, because the second that is resolving and it's in the game, it's very hard to progress when you're playing Sword Soul.
You have to go neg to get rid of it, or have... Yeah, you either have to have Chalice or Droplet, or you have to go neg with an Adhara and then a Long Yan, and then you have to discard something for the Long Yan just to not get a token, and then synchro into a Yazi, and then hope they don't have something for the Yazi.
Yeah, it's definitely not in the Sword Soul's favor in that point. Also, the fact that everyone has D-Barrier in their side isn't helping either. Definitely a few things that are unfortunate, to say the least.
Big
But
import.
It's it kind of is what it is though, right? Like you really have to adapt to the meta, and like we just saw Walter Jewell top the previous YCS as well, which I think is also very important to note because there was quite a few tech cards in the list, especially things like Nightbeam, which is always just one of those cards that come in and out of the meta.
Whoa. Was Nightbeam a tech card in one of the lists?
Yes, it was.
Ooh.
That's amazing, because I was literally sitting here at my desk like a week ago or less thinking, man, Nightbeam seems kind of cool right now.
Oh yeah, that's a nice set quick play spell you got there.
That's a super sweet Prank Kids Fusion spell. That's a sweet branded in red.
Let's not.
That's so funny.
I mean, I don't really like the card personally. I think that it's pretty good, but at the same point is that you just can't respond with that specific card. You can respond with something else and then respond with that card.
Right.
So, like, if they have Mirror Jade live, they can just go Mirror Jade target itself and then chain branded in red.
But
So,
it's
like-
still funny.
Like, it's not, like, terrible, and I could definitely see the application where it'd be good, but I just feel like that card in particular is not that crazy.
Yeah.
But that's just something, again, with, like, theorying that you just got to think about. Is how many decks are going to have some kind of response on board. It's the same argument with, like, Dark Ruler, right? It's like when you play against, like, Dragon, like, Dark Ruler's terrible because they just go, or you go Dark Ruler, they go chain a card, then chain Hot Red, right?
Yeah.
So it is what it is, but I definitely could see where it was really helpful. I could see where it might not have been helpful.
Yeah, definitely. That's an interesting card to bring up, though, very specifically. All right, next I want to talk about Adventure Phantom Knight DP. This is a deck that we saw a lot more at the very beginning, right when Adventure released. This was like the Scythe deck. It was the deck that people were playing with Adventure. Everybody just kind of figured at first that, hey, Phantom Knight's going to be the best deck. And it really never had the representation in Top Cut that people just expected of it. And that's, I find, very interesting. And it's interesting to see it pop up now of all times. So, I don't know. Maybe just people weren't really expecting it and it kind of snuck up on the meta. But it's interesting to see a couple of them top here.
So with Phantom Knight, it's really one of those things where the deck was pretty decent before and it started topping quite a bit. But at the beginning of the format, when everyone was ready for it, the deck became absolutely terrible because everyone was citing Lancia for it. The sideboards were overlapping for it. And there was just a lot of situations where, yeah, like everything was just kind of against it. And now that it's not common and people aren't exactly saying that, like, that's something to look out for, right? That's where it really does shine, where it still has a lot of nice combo. There's still a lot of ways that you can play. That's what I really like about the deck. And so right now, I'm not really surprised to see it topping, especially with it being like one of the better decks to do the Scythe Lock with. I think it's the second best deck to do it with, but I definitely think that it's a solid one to be working with.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next we have Tri-Brigade Branded. This deck is so cool. I don't know that it's so good, but it's so cool for sure.
So that deck, you have to run a lot of garnets, which I don't know if I love. It's depending too on which build you're running. If you're running like the Albion, like the dragon, with the trap card, or if you're just running like the Branded Fusion and the Mercurier, or if you're running all four.
Yeah.
I think that the one that's just running the bird and the fusion, I think that one's really nice. But when it comes to the extra garnets in that type of a deck, I'm not a huge fan. I like Tri-Brigade alone, though. I actually said that a couple weeks ago, that the Tri-Brigade deck was going to win the regional that I was playing, and it ended up going 10-0 at a different regional. So it was definitely really cool to see that too. I just kind of knew that was going to be like the deck that would really sneak up on everyone, because I was testing it online for a little while and I was like, man, this deck's kind of wild with all these new cards. And I definitely think that it has a footing in the format now, and we'll be seeing a bit more Tri-Brigade very soon.
Yeah, I think that Tri-Brigade is an interesting choice because when you think about it, the engine itself hasn't had any hits. All the hits have come either to the Zodiac engine or the Lyrilisk engine. So it's interesting to see it take more of a pure form with the actual Despia cards and the actual branded cards. For example, Tri-Brigade Mercurier. This is something that came out of the structure deck. It represents a monster negate in the form of a hand trap.
Yeah, so, I still think that it's wild that those two are working together right now because one's all about fusions and the other one's all about Lincoln. So it's pretty interesting to see that combination.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But I think it's really nice to see the Tri-Brigade deck being meshed with something that it was actually built and intended to mesh with. I think that that's a really interesting dynamic that we haven't seen from the Tri-Brigade deck so far.
Yeah, that's fair. I definitely think that it's nice to get some more decks going in the meta, especially because Tri-Brigade fell out for a while after Bird Up got hit really hard. Right. But I still thought that it's one of those decks that just has one of the best utility spots as far as room, and still being able to play the cat, honestly. Like, the Rescue Cat's nuts.
Yeah, that card is insane.
Playing Cat Gamma is just, it's a mood. That's definitely really nice to see that back in the meta, because that's a deck that I was just really surprised, and I'm pretty sure it was just lack of representation of the deck in a lot of the events that we were going to, but like Tri-Brigade was bound to come back very fast.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is a representation thing. I think that if this deck saw the representation that Branded did, you would see a lot more of these in Top Cut, but it's probably only had a handful of pilots in the entire room. But it's really interesting to see just how strong this deck can perform when given the opportunity. I'm interested to see how far this deck actually went in the tournament itself. All right, next we have Adventure Cyberse Eldritch DPE. I don't think that this deck is anything super surprising. It's the best Scythe Lock deck that there is. And until Scythe gets hit, this deck will be there. It has a crazy recursion engine in Eldritch. It has a crazy one-card starters with the Cyberse engine. It can throw out an Omni Negate with the Adventure engine, as well as using that to link climb. And DPE, of course, the recursion engine of Eldritch and the power of Eldritch to just never run out of resources meshes so well with DPE. So I'm not surprised at all to see this deck here.
Yeah, it's also one of those things too where at the very least you can just run like Skill Drain and then have a 3500 beat stick that can be killed by card effects, which is pretty crazy. So I really like that aspect of the deck too, because like you can play really aggro or you can play very control. And I feel like that's just why that deck is so strong right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The deck is good. I don't know what else to say. Adventure Dragon Link DPE is an interesting deck. I think that this deck kind of suffers from it has to run like 60 cards. You basically have to see the adventure package. You have to have that line into DPE, and you still have to have your Dragon Link line. It's potentially can do crazy things, but I don't think that this deck is as good as the other decks in the room, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think that the deck is still one of the better decks, though, simply because it's always in Top Cut. The deck itself is very consistent. The ability to just have the one-card starters, that's just everything, honestly. I think that moving forward, we're going to see more of it. I think the Eldritch has just really started itself again in the format, and it's just going to keep going.
Talking about Dragon Link.
Oh, I was still on Eldritch, my bad.
You're good. No, Eldritch is crazy.
No, in my own head, I was actually thinking about it because that's something that I'm actually thinking about moving forward playing. And every time I start thinking about that deck, I just start thinking about it in my head. But the Adventurer Dragon Link deck, that one, it's really just not strong at the moment. I think that its Despia matchup is really bad currently, which is really surprising because it's just one of those decks that have always been good, right? It's never really lost its spotlight. So to really say that Dragon Link isn't the greatest it really is surprising.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The deck's good, sure, it does a lot of stuff, but I think it needs to run, like when you're running up at that 60 card mark, you're not running a Magician Souls package probably because it doesn't mesh well with the deck. I mean, you absolutely could, but
if you wanted to go that route, that is.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just don't think that the deck has the consistency in a 60 card deck that things like Cyber's Eldritch do.
No, most definitely not. Particularly since a good chunk of
the deck has already been hit.
Yeah, a good chunk of the deck's already been hit. Not only that, but then also a good chunk of the Rocket engine also kind of locks you into Dark Dragons.
Yeah.
So after you extend to a certain point, you can only extend further using Dark Dragons off your extra deck.
Right. Next, we have Adventurer Salamandra DP. Salad is an interesting choice. People are talking about Gazelle and Circle to 3,
which would be cool.
But honestly, I think Salad's in an okay place as a solid rogue option. I don't necessarily know that they need all that gas back. And getting 2 and 3 Gazelle, and actually I think Circle's already at 2.
I think.
But I don't know that
I haven't looked.
Yeah, I don't have the list in front of me, but I just don't know that we're ready for those cards to come back yet. But it is interesting to see it topping, and Salamandra can thrive right now in a format where D-Barrier is prevalent because it's a link engine, and also being able to put out the Ibli to lock your opponent out of things that aren't link summons is pretty nice. Unless you're playing against a deck that can just make Verte, in which case, not as nice, but still interesting.
Unless you're somehow able to U-lock your opponent and then also give them an Ibli on top of that.
Yeah, so just do what happened to Caleb at the YCS.
Twice!
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, the Salad deck, I always feel like it has a really interesting spot in the format because with Salad, I know that it's going to be getting more cards off the list soon, hopefully. That's what everyone's saying, right? We're going to be getting like 2 or 3 Circle. Well, it's already at 2, so probably like 3 Circle. And then
I just looked it up. It's a 2.
Yeah, so we'll get like 3 Circle. We might get like a second Gazelle. What people don't realize, though, is that when somebody who's been piloting Salad for a while picks it back up, that deck's actually pretty scary diverse because of the grind game and the amount of resources that can be in the graveyard. Because It doesn't take much for that deck to go off. And it also can main deck floodgates like Rivalry and Gozen. So it's definitely something where if it does get more support, I know it's like a meme deck right now and it's just like access code Gobert. But other than that, like the deck itself really can grind and it can turn into a meta heavy deck very fast. So I'm not really surprised seeing it in Top Cut because again, if someone's been piling that deck for a long time and they really realize how you should be playing the deck right now with more of a mid-range game than like just trying to go for game, I think that it's not the worst deck.
Yeah, I don't think it's the worst deck by any means, but I'm pretty hesitant to give them back 3 Gazelle or 3 Circle. That's all I'm saying. No, I mean.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting because if that ever comes back to like full power, that's something that I would even consider playing. You know, like that's actually one of my favorite cards in the game is Flame Buffalo. That card says draw 2. The card's so good. So I don't know. That's something where if that actually came back to like full power status, I probably would try it out.
Yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about. Next, we have Adventure Synchro. So I'm assuming that this is like the Rose Dragon Adventure deck. A lot of people are calling it Rad, based. But this is like the cut down to 40 list. I think that this is an interesting deck. It's interesting to me that it doesn't seem to see as much representation here necessarily as other decks. A lot of that could be about the price point of the deck. A lot of that could be that the deck is, I would say, notoriously difficult to play. But regardless, pretty cool. I mean, I don't really know what else to say. I mean, you're running a deck that runs like 17 hand traps.
Yeah.
and uses them as combo pieces. In addition to using your adventure packages combo pieces, you're pretty reliant upon seeing the adventure engine. But when you're playing things like 3 Prosperity, when you're playing things like Souls to draw cards, I mean, you're going to see it, you know?
Statistically, anyway.
Right, exactly. So it's an interesting deck. It's interesting though. It's crazy to me that this deck doesn't really have the. It's interesting. I keep saying it's interesting. I need to quit saying that.
Yeah.
It's odd that this deck doesn't have a higher representation though, because of the players like Asala, Jesse Cotton, and Cody Angeloff popularizing this deck at YCS Charlotte. Normally, when you see a lot of pro players like that, all Theorioing and labbing one deck, it sees a lot more representation, but we don't really have that representation here. Now, the deck's pretty difficult to play. The combo lines are very non-intuitive, but at the end of the day, it's a very good deck that I don't think you should sleep on. And it's really interesting because it can be kind of difficult to understand where to hand trap the deck. Because, as I've said, it's pretty unintuitive. It's something that you really have to kind of figure out where you want to go with it before you actually commit into things.
Yeah, the sad deck, it's really cool in a sense that you can go straight into a Baron without really giving your opponent a window to hand trap, because there isn't really one other than like D-Shifter. But I think that the deck itself, it's definitely one of those things where it's very reliant on drawing certain cards, and other times it's like, I hope my Hulk of Fibrax doesn't get ashed or impermed, and that seems very scary. So I think that's where the amount of players using the deck is very low. I also think that when we had these types of decks, that they did really well because nobody knew what it was. And so now that more people know what it was, and again, there's overlapping sideboard cards coming in, like D-Barrier Token Collector, that's where the deck is really seeing a downfall, because there's so many cards that counter it that it just becomes a really rough time to play it.
Right. Absolutely. And then we have 7 unknowns. I think that we can leave those alone, mainly because, guess what? We don't know what they are. But there are a couple of decks that I want to mention here that's really interesting that we don't see them at all in Top Cut. Mainly Fluanderees. Normally, I think you would see a good bit more Fluanderees than you see here. And I think that a large reason that you don't see it here is simply because of you have so many of these decks that are playing things like the Necro World Banshee to activate Zombie World from the deck. That combo's crazy, and it really hurts this deck.
Yeah, it's very strong. There's also a lot of back row removal in everyone's sideboard right now. So it's definitely a rough day to play the Flunderbirds.
For sure. Other than that, are there any other decks that you're kind of surprised to not see in Top Cut? Caleb, Gary?
Not particularly, no. Everything was kind of what I expected.
No Sky Striker.
I'm not really surprised to see no Striker. I feel like that's a deck that you literally have to play to a T. Like, you have to play it perfectly, or else it's just not going to reward you. It's one of those things where if you mess up one time, you really put yourself behind in a match. And there's a lot of decks out there that they also just need a lot of things to go right for them to be good. There's also a lot of decks out there that need to go first. Because we always put a lot of decks into categories, like even when I'm doing a tier list. And usually I would put certain decks a little lower because they don't have the ability to really play second. If you see your opponent start making full board and you have to scoop because your deck doesn't break that, I think that there's a problem. And I think that's where we're starting to see the divide in the better decks from the worst decks in our format currently, which is funny because I feel like our format never really got solid, period. I feel like everyone's always just been like, you know, this is best deck, this is best deck, this just became best deck, or like we keep swapping back and forth. And it's even just like the Despia deck. Like there's 100 different options to do when you're using the deck. So I just am really hoping that we get a ban list rather soon. because I really want to just get into a format that is solved. That's why I'm very excited for Splight, because I just want it to be a nice either triangle or just 1 to 2 deck format and call it a day, because I feel like at that point we're relying more on the skill base of the mirror matches, and that's what I really enjoy about the game.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I don't know that Splight will be as good here as it is in the OCG, simply because we don't have Max C, so we can't search it with Splight. But
which is unfortunate.
I mean, I don't think it's unfortunate at all. I think we're very fortunate to not have.
Oh no! It's unfortunate for Splight.
Yeah. I think we're very fortunate to not have.
Yeah. So like, as far as I know, the deck's just going to be totally awesome turbo, which isn't a bad thing, especially because they can like use totally awesome and then revive it.
Yeah.
On top of having a spell and a spell trap and a monster negate.
Right. Okay. Let's take just a moment to, of course, thank our sponsor, ETB Games. So, for those that don't know, ETB Games is our locals in Alexandria, Louisiana. ETB Games is your one-stop shop for everything that you need for all of your Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Digimon, whatever card game needs. They have singles and sealed product. They have deck boxes, binders, playmats, sleeves, appropriately sized for all of those card games. They also have everything that you need for all of your tabletop games. They have the books, they have the mats, they have a space to play, they have the figurines, paint for the figurines, everything that you could need, tons of dice, all of that. They also have a great space to hang out and play some video games if you're wanting to do that. Be sure to check them out. Like I said, they are in Alexandria, Louisiana. I believe this weekend they are having the ETB Battle City Monthly. If you're interested in that, please come and check us out. All right, so let's talk about some cards that are good tech options in the format. So I think that there are some cards that stand out above and beyond others. We've mentioned some of them. We haven't mentioned others. But I want to start with Dimensional Barrier. I think that this card stands out above and beyond the rest when it comes to this particular format. It is incredible in the Despia matchup. It's incredible in the Sword Soul matchup. It's incredible in any of the Synchro decks, the Rose Dragon Adventure Synchro, whatever. It shines in those matchups. It can be a little crusty in some other matchups, like the Prank Kids matchup or the Eldritch matchup, things like that. So I wouldn't main deck it, but I think that it's one of the strongest side deck cards of the format. Fair assessment?
I would say so, at least, anyway. Oh, through my humble opinion.
Fair. Are we all agreed then? D-Barrier is good?
D-Barrier is
so
very good.
D-Barrier is really nice right now. It's something, though, where you have to have a deck that can either really take control of the game in that one turn or just straight up OTK. Because if you flip D-Barrier on Despia or Sword Soul and you can't put up a good board or you can't just OTK, they will OTK.
Yes.
So it's one of those things where, yes, D-Barrier is pretty good, but you better be prepared to set up some kind of floodgate, some kind of like nice board, OTK. You need to do something behind it.
You need to have the follow through to back it up. Which is fair. So, next card I want to talk about is Token Collector. Token Collector.
Insane.
I'm sorry?
The card's insane.
Yeah, Token Collector is good in any deck that has an adventure matchup, specifically if that deck summons extra tokens outside of adventure. So, when you look at it, you have adventure Prank Kids, you have Sword Soul, and surprisingly, the Eldritch deck actually summons some tokens, because I believe one of the Cyberse link monsters that they use, when it's linked off, it summons a couple of tokens. Is that right?
I don't know. It sounds a lot like Link Cross, who is
no.
banned.
No. It's one of the Cyberse effect monsters that they use.
Yeah, it's Link Devotee.
Yeah, Devotee. That's what it is. Yeah. So, Token Collector, great card in a lot of matchups, and it's really good right now, especially when you can like send it off of Shooting Riser if you don't need to send Snow or whatever. Good card. I would absolutely consider it in the side deck of any deck that is not exactly Sword Soul, because Sword Soul cannot side deck Token Collector. I mean, could in theory, but like, I wouldn't.
Yeah, not super ideal, but Token Collector is one of those cards that's literally just game. Like, if you have it against Sword Soul and they don't have an answer to it, it's just game.
It is the end of the game.
That and like Cyber's Eldritch, you reveal Token Collector, it's an oof. It's one of those cards that I will not take out of my side until tokens are not relevant.
Right.
And then there's Dino, who's just kind of off in the corner maining it because they want their tokens to be popped.
True.
Which is hilarious to me.
Caleb, quit playing Dino. I don't like it. It scares me. Of course.
There's been a very big increase of people playing Dino right now, which is pretty surprising.
Dino's a good deck. Dino is a surprisingly good deck right now because of the ability to main cards like Gamma and Token Collector. And it can play into the Despia board really well because it will not give Despia a turn 3 or another turn. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like it's very decent. I don't know if it's like super crazy. It's like decent though.
Being able to put up UCT Dolka Token Collector. As a Sword Soul player, I cry.
Yeah, but there's just like a lot of hand traps in the format right now, and I know like Misk stops those, but like you also have to get to Misk, so like your small worlds and your prosperities need to resolve, and you need to see it. Otherwise, hand trap central is it's tough for that deck.
But a card that we're going to talk about next that is not really in the format is Artifact Lancia.
True.
And that card murders Dino.
Well, it keeps them off of exactly Ultimate Conductor and the Misk Special Summon, but they can still...
And it keeps them off of extending with Giant Rex.
Yeah, but they can still, at minimum, probably still put out like a Dolka. However...
words you never hear the same again.
Yeah, it is exact... one Dolka isn't a great board. It's a board, but it's one that's fairly easily broken with literally Forbidden Chalice.
Yeah.
What do I care?
You don't even need anything else. Just Forbidden Chalice. Let's go.
Yeah. So, I think Lancia is a really interesting card right now. I don't know that it hits enough to justify its play. I, for whatever reason, cannot find myself cutting it from my side deck because the card is just so good. Like, it's not good when it's not good, but when it's good, it's good.
I think it's because you played me a lot, and Lancia just kind of
hit the big oof.
Yeah, murders the past 2 decks I've played.
True, you're actually absolutely correct. It could be bias, but it feels so good to be like Lancia. Pass. Feels good. How do we feel about Dark Ruler No More?
Not right now. I don't think it's that good. I don't think there's a big enough board that actually matters to Dark Ruler right now.
Yeah, I tried it out a little bit, and I was very whelmed by it.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, not overwhelmed, not underwhelmed, just whelmed. It's a good card, but this is just not the
format.
Not the format for it.
And it's interesting you say that because I feel like Dark Ruler is pretty good right now. I think that when you play it into a lot of these boards that are very, very reliant upon putting out kind of the board, like basically any of the Synchro decks, I think Dark Ruler is really good into those decks. Of course, you also have D-Barrier for those decks, so maybe one option for going first, one option for going second. I don't know, but I think Dark Ruler is pretty cool. That's my personal take.
Yeah, I just don't think there's any boards right now that actually like need a Dark Ruler to answer them though. So like maybe in the future, but just not now. I think in the Splayed format that card's insane, but just not needed at the moment.
Yeah.
But I mean, you could always just do what I did that one time. Regeki Chalice.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got Regeki, then just Regeki, Baron Negate, Chalice, All right, then. GG's, you got it.
Yeah, Burner Chain Widow. My best combo against the deck.
Right. All right, how do we feel about Droll and Lockbird?
Also very meh. Also just very, very meh. A lot of people want to side it against like the Despia deck, but if they opening and they do it in the draw phase, it just matters so much less. And it's one of those things where like, yes, it's good against the pile decks, but like there's such better sideboard cards right now than even Dark Ruler or Droll.
Okay. How do we feel about Ghost Bell?
Ghost Bell, it depends. So here's the thing.
I'll lump in Ghost Bell and Ghost Ogre together. I know they're very different cards that serve very different purposes, but I kind of feel the same way about them.
So Bell is one of those cards that is like mandatory to run, but it also depends on how much you respect people main decking Branded Lost. If you don't think that they're main decking Branded Lost, you can get away with playing just like the 2. I've seen some people go less and just use it as a crossout target. But if you think that no one's going to be on that card, then you could just play 3 of it, and then it's really solid in that matchup.
Right.
It's really interesting because once we all saw Lost in the format, we're just like, wow, Bell says activation. This card's terrible. So, like, it's kind of, again, like that 50-50 shot on, do you think more people are going to be on Lost than not, or no?
Right.
As far as Ogre goes, that card's just mandatory. You need to be able to hit Adventure with that. Because most decks that rely on Adventure to go off, you just auto-win the second you Ogre it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I personally am on 2-2 on both. But I don't know. I think Ogre's still very good into, like you said, into any of the Adventure matchups. And I kind of feel the same way about Ghost Bell that Caleb feels about Dark Ruler. Very whelmed.
Yeah.
So, how do we feel about Nibiru?
That card in this format is terrible. It's just one of those things where there's not, like I was saying earlier with Dark Ruler, like there's not a lot of very big boards, and there's not a lot of people extending super hard, which is where I feel like that card is really lackluster. I think that if you keep it in your sideboard, that's still smart because there's still people running like Sword Soul and whatnot. But there's just not enough like combo in the format right now for me to think that that card would be warranted to play.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If you look at the Sword Soul matchups as a whole, Nibiru is very solid into the Sword Soul matchup, just as it is into a lot of the current matchups. But when you have either Branded playing completely under Nibiru and not even summoning 5 times, or Nibiru doesn't necessarily hurt them when you activate it. Nibiru can put them in a place where they kind of already want to be. Additionally, you can also end up playing against a deck like the Rose Dragon Synchro deck. That deck can put out the Wandering Griffin Rider in 5 summons or less, and then follow that up with a Baron immediately. So Nibiru feels really subpar this format because either they're summoning less than 5 times or they're putting up a negate in less than 5. So my thoughts on Nibiru. I have cut it from my main end side.
I think a card that everyone should be siding right now, though, is Summon Limit. That card's insane.
All right, let's talk for a moment about Summon Limit because I know that when we talked to Chris Lofton last week after his YCS win, you had Summon Limit being the card that basically won him the game in finals. So I know that you're very in on Summon Limit right now, Gary. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I played 16 games at different events. Every single time that I saw Summon Limit, I auto won. So that card is goated. Like, it's just one of those things where, like, if your opponent does not have the out for Summon Limit, it's just GG. Like, they go
Low and painful death.
Summon, search, go Brand Fusion, make Rebellion, flip Summon Limit, GG. It's like that card is so absurd. Also, if you're playing DPE and you have DPE Summon Limit, that's literally FTK. It's actually FTK. Like it's so wild. Like if you have that or the ability to play that card, you play it. That card's nuts.
That card makes me cry. I hate that card. That card should be banned. I'm not even joking. It is very antithetical to what the game has become. It is the complete opposite of what we consider Yu-Gi-Oh to be. It was released at a time when summoning twice in a turn was not like necessarily the norm. Summon Thunder King Pass was a legitimate play. You know?
Like the
set a monster pass.
Like the most common play where summon limit would even be feasible as a proper effect is normal summon Tengu Crash.
Or even when you look at some of the Synchro combo decks.
Yeah, or like normal summon Lone Fire effect. That's 2 summons.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, then compared to now, it's a completely different ballgame. I really think that summon limit goes completely against what the game has become.
It's a completely different children's card game on motorcycles.
Yeah. And I very firmly believe that is a card that should be banned. So, that's my thoughts. And I'm sticking to it. All right, let's do podcast question of the day. So, last episode's podcast question of the day was, what deck do you think is the best deck in the meta right now? So we got some different answers. Brave Prank, then Branded, then Based. Some people think that once the ratios are figured out, Adventure Branded is best. You know, again, Brave Prank Kids, the Sad or Rad deck, things like that. We got a lot of different answers. We, of course, got people saying things like Pendulum. I disagree.
Striker best deck.
And, of course, we have crazy people saying things like Striker best deck. Again, I disagree, but I respect your right to a wrong opinion. We, of course, have people saying things like Mystic Mine, Megalith, Melfi Tri Brigade, Adagnister. Listen, I know you all think you're funny, and you kind of are. That's it. That's all I've got. I'm done. That was the end of the sentence. All right. So, this week's podcast question of the day is, what do you think is the best tech card in the meta? I think it's D-Barrier. I am open to being convinced that it is Token Collector, but D-Barrier is a hell of a card. What do you guys think? What's the best tech card in the meta?
As far as right now, I still think that a lot of people, like, I'm looking at TCG Play right now. Did you know that alt art bells are like $13?
Yeah. Dual Devastator was one of the best purchases I've ever made. I bought 3 of them when I got back into the game for $90. Feels so good.
That's like actually insane though. Like alt art bells are $13. Crazy. Yeah. So I mean, when it comes to like tech cards, I'm like trying to think about like my side right now. It's like not even a tech card anymore, but I still think like Token Collector it should be a mandatory side 30. And I see some people that are like pulling it out of their sideboard. I'm like, no, like it stays there. Like even if Despia's best deck, like you keep Token Collector on your side. That card's broken.
Yeah, that card's insane. That card ends decks.
I will say a very underrated tech choice is actually Red Reboot.
That's not a tech choice. That's like something you just put in your side deck. It's like, okay, I'm building my side deck. What do I start with?
Fair.
Red Reboot.
Fair. That is fair.
At least for me, anyway. I don't like back row decks.
Neither do I. So for me, it's just a mandatory start with. Let's go.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I would have to agree with Token Collector kind of being a mandatory 3 in the side right now.
Right.
And probably up until Sword Soul and Adventure both get either Power Crept out or
they get the axe on the list.
Or face the wrath of the Banhammer.
Right. All right. That'll wrap us up for today's episode. Guys, do you have any closing thoughts?
I'm good.
Jared, why don't you go ahead and plug all your stuff?
Again, Striker best deck. But so if you've not already looked at my channel, I'm on Twitch, I'm on YouTube. Definitely go ahead and check it out. I talk about why Striker the best deck is all the time on the channel, but no, more importantly, I do help teach everyone learn how to get better at the game, where to hand trap, and then also if you'd like a coaching session over at Metafy, definitely go ahead and check me out over there.
All right, you heard it here, folks. Be sure to check out Gary on Metafy. Check him out on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, everywhere that you get your Yu-Gi-Oh content. You can find GGYGO. He is absolutely one of the most interesting channels to watch, in my opinion. Also, be sure to check him out on Metafy. I cannot recommend Gary enough. He is a great dude and a great player.
And we're not just saying that because he's right here listening.
Right. I promise.
Right.
Okay. So also be sure, of course, to check out our Patreon, check out our TCG player affiliate link. Be sure to check out all of those wonderful things. Check out ETB Games. Check out Team Dark Arm Dealings there. That is our sister channel from Locals. They have all of the tournament coverage and deck profiles from all the tournaments that we go to. Be sure to check all of that out. The links are all in the description down below. And until next time, have a great week, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Later.